This is a story postulating the Journal of Alexander of Athens, staff reporter for the Athens Philosophical Review, on assignment to Israel. Well, here I am in Israel, a country I never expected to visit, and I've been taking a few days to sort out my thoughts. Several months ago, my editor assigned me to do a series of articles that would investigate the religious beliefs of the Hebrews and how they contrast with some of the concepts of our Greek philosophers. This is a departure from the usual things we publish in the Athens Philosophical Review. We've gotten a number of letters to the editor by regular readers who've become what they call God-fears. Apparently they've decided to worship the God of the Hebrews. That wouldn't be too unusual, except this Yahweh worship requires them to believe in and worship the one God only, leaving the gods of their ancestors behind. These God-fears have explained they're not interested in most of the rituals of the Hebrews, but in the spirituality and morality they find in Yahweh. The upshot of it was that the editor called me into his office and told me to go to Israel. Personally, I think I could have simply talked to the Hebrews who lived outside of Israel, but he wanted me to go to the source, so to speak. The problem I've encountered is that the Hebrews don't have a single unified set of ideas. All right, I'll admit the philosophers don't either. We have the epics and the Epicureans and the Cynics, the Platonists, and those who follow Aristotle, dozens of others. I've been a little lost on how to proceed. What ideas do I contrast between religion and philosophy? Many philosophers don't deny the gods, but they teach their ideas largely separate from religion. The Hebrews have wisdom teachings that have some crossover ideas with philosophy, but it's always tangled up with their religious perspectives. After being here for a while and trying to get a handle on the subject, I heard about a traveling preacher who was gaining a great deal of popularity. I'll go tomorrow to find him. A month later, I decided to focus in on this Jesus I encountered. After all, our readers appreciate fresh perspectives. That's even one of the criticisms of people in Athens, that we gad about with new ideas. It had taken me a while to catch up with Jesus, but I found then that his popularity got in the way because I couldn't get any one-on-one time for an interview. Or maybe that's better, so I've been listening to what everyone else is hearing. And as the weeks go on, I'm finding I'm struggling. The problem I've been having isn't the intellectual part. I can find ideas to contrast and compare. One particular area would be the relationship of a person's life to the material world. We also have ideas about this in philosophy. I've been fascinated by Aristippus and Aesthenes. Aristippus insisted that he possessed but was not possessed by the material world. Antisthenes chose instead not to possess, so he might not become possessed by the material world. Both idea paths have their merits. And then, of course, there's the Stoics, who approach the material world with the desire not to be impacted by either good or bad experiences. The Epicureans, contrary to their reputation, seek to live a pleasant life, but not to be controlled by their desire for material or pleasure. There are points of relationship here with things that this Jesus teaches and how he lives. There's his discussion of God and wealth, for example. He says you can't serve both and asks whether life isn't more than food. But Jesus doesn't appear to take a single approach. There was one rich man who wanted to follow him. Jesus said he had to sell everything he had in order to do it. Yet there are other followers who have not been required to do the same thing. I thought this was capricious, but over time realized that this seeming inconsistency is likely explained by differences in the individuals themselves. Jesus seems to recognize that some are possessed by their possessions while others are not. This more fluid approach doesn't fit a rigid adoption of a philosophical idea, but it does seem realistic. Aristippus might have said he possessed but was not possessed, But there's no denying that the stories about him indicate that he did enjoy the praise of the world. Isn't that being possessed to some degree? But is the opposite approach completely better, to refuse all possessions? I'm mindful of the story I heard once from some Eastern source. It was about the two men who came to a woman trying to cross muddy water without spoiling her silk gown. The older man simply picked her up and carried her across. The younger was furious and chewed on his anger for hours before accusing the other of breaking his vow of staying away from women. The older man pointed out that he'd left the woman back at the stream, but the younger man was still carrying her. I've often thought of that story, since it shows that an obsession not to be owned by the world or something else might be a strange form of being possessed by that same world, or whatever it is. At one point in my investigation, I wondered if Jesus could have been influenced by Stoicism. He certainly seems able to both fast and feast without angst for either, but his emotions are more involved than I believe a pure Stoic would approve. So I considered whether he was a natural Epicurean, modestly enjoying life without being possessed by it. He doesn't quite fit there either. Jesus laughs and he cries. In fact, he seems to feel things passionately. The greatest passions of Jesus appear to be on behalf of others. I'll admit to finding this curiously attractive. Okay, that's not how I'm supposed to be reacting to this, but I should be maintaining philosophical distance. Fortunately, as the time's gone on, I've realized I may have to admit to developing some journalistic bias when I get to writing my articles. Philosophy mostly seems to be concerned with the self and establishing guidelines for what's good in life, for choosing it. There's wisdom in it, and I can't say that there's no concern for others by philosophers. But there also doesn't appear to be a strong place for that concern in the ideas themselves. When it comes to Jesus, I'd have to say he's much more materialistic than many philosophers, but it's expressed in the area of other people. He wants them fed, clothed, visited, comforted, and downright loved. I'm beginning to see what these God-fearers find attractive in the Hebrew faith. Generally, the other gods don't seem that interested in what we humans do, especially not without a generous offering. Now, Exophanes did say that he thought our ideas made the gods more powerful, but we portray them essentially as petty as we are. But his approach was to suggest that while he believed there was only one God, or at least only one dominant God, this God is so removed from the human realm as to be uninterested or uninvolved. Exophanes had a point, but that is not the belief of the Hebrews. The God of the Hebrews is completely the opposite, in fact. Their teachings include specifics like honesty in the marketplace, that this Yahweh is personally offended, for example, by dishonest weights. The Hebrews teach that how they treat others is much the same as doing it to their God. I ran across something from the wisdom teaching saying that giving to the poor is lending to their Lord. To insult them is to heap scorn on their God. And the teacher, Jesus, appears to have fully incorporated that attitude, applying it even to himself, that what is done to others, both good and bad, is akin to doing it for him. I've got the strange suspicion that he'd like all of his followers to feel the same level of compassion for other people and for the world. This would mean that they're called to care so deeply that what happens to others feels as if it's happening to them. This teaching is terrifying and attractive. The challenge, of course, would be living in a world where not everyone has the same approach. And it's certainly true that while many Hebrews embrace these ideas on some level, not all of them do. Jesus has serious opponents, even enemies, who are doing what they can to slow him down or to stop him. Yet he continues. In this, at least, he appears like a Stoic. Neither criticism nor praise seems to change his essential nature. As in many teachings, he believes in returning good for good, but he also believes in returning good for bad, not ignoring it, but actively returning something good when harm has been dished out. My mind races with this attempt to figure out where I'm going to go with my articles for the review. I thought that taking a few days off would help, but strangely, I've mostly regretted not going with the group that went to Jerusalem. Jesus was headed there for the religious festival. I'm leaving tomorrow to catch up with him. Journal entry the day after the crucifixion. It's been several days since I wrote anything. I've been too overcome by events. I went to Jerusalem where, well, everything was in a mount of turmoil. It usually is apparently around the time of the Hebrew Passover, but even more so because of Jesus. Then some of the religious leaders got him arrested, and the Roman governor crucified him yesterday. Even as I write this, I'm having trouble believing it actually happened. How could a man who cared so much for other people die that way? And surely philosophers talk about Socrates, who was sentenced to die and calmly drank his hemlock poison. It's so different from this agonizing and degrading death. All right, so I admit there was a part of me that began to believe the world would be better because of Jesus and the things he taught. Of course, maybe if his disciples keep teaching the things he did, it won't be completely lost. That's something to hope for. Funny, hope isn't usually part of my philosophy, but I need it now. As for me, I don't know now what to write, except to say that I liked Jesus. It doesn't make sense, but in a strange way, I feel as if I've lost a good friend. Amen.